what is wonderful with that approach is that in the meeting of the religious leaders, we also bring parents who are church members. And that has also works wonderfully, because then parents will say, I am a mother of a lesbian woman, I am a member of a church. I become conflicted when you are on the pulpit and saying my child is a demon. How does that work? And it has changed the attitudes of the religious leaders.
Redwood, Neem.
Today's episode of Baobab, Redwood and Neem, we talk to Virginia Magwaza of The Other Foundation in Johannesburg, South Africa. In her more than 30 years as a campaigner for human rights, Virginia has worked on issues relating to racial equality in South Africa and the privatization of public resources. Currently, Virginia is a campaigner for the human rights of LGBTQI people in Southern Africa. I began the interview by asking her about what it felt like to be a black South African in 1994 as apartheid was ending.
The feeling was a sense of freedom. We all thought, this is it. We have come to the point where all our problems are solved. And we were excited, we filled the streets of Soweto. We looked forward to the future. And the future was filled with promises of employment, free education, free access to services, and we didn't question what was happening. But at that time, just in 1994, before my father died, he kept on saying to me, my daughter, there is something into this. There's no way that Madiba can just be released from prison. You will ask me, even if I'm no longer on this earth, you will find out. Because my father was reading a lot, and we used to have very serious conversation. It's me and him.
Was your father also part of the struggle?
He was not part of the struggle, but he was very informed. He was reading, he was watching the news, and he was sharing what he was gathering from his reading. And when he said that, I was like, hey, my father is negative. What's wrong with him? We must just be happy, you know? And I got so angry because we are Zulu.
In those days, there was also talk about a sort of a Xhosa mafia.
Yes, Xhosa mafia and Xhosa clique.
Yeah.
And for me, because I was still a bit young, I felt like, oh no, because I was so excited about this notion of freedom and this notion of us being able to vote and being able to do things that we couldn't do during apartheid.
Yeah.
And I just thought my father was not appreciating all that.
Yeah.
But after his death, then I was admitted to study at Kenya College. And Kenya College then was a pre-university college that taught progressive education. So I was exposed to African literature, politics, and sociology. And as I was reading my first book, because I didn't have a culture of reading because of my background, my first book that I read was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And I connected that with what my father would always say about how corruption will always, ruin all the wonderful things that people have fought for. And when I was grasping that, then he died. He died in October 10, 1994. and I made it a point that then I read more and understand, and I became exposed to a whole lot of political groupings where I was able to read and understand actually the politics behind the 1994.
We met more than 10 years ago. So let's focus on one aspect. I remember there was a time when they were talking about privatizing the water and water meters and so on. Tell us a bit about that part of the struggle.
Yeah, that struggle came as part of, should I say, being baptized into post-1994 politics, because I had read and been exposed to a whole lot of platforms around understanding why the negotiated settlement and the politics that were pushed by the ANC or the alliance then were actually not useful for the working class. And then I was living in the township then, and problems were being experienced by people around electricity cutoffs, water cutoffs, housing.
This was in Soweto?
This is in Soweto and Diepkloof. And then I started putting together or mobilizing my neighbors and then sat down with them and said, so what do we do with these problems? And people were so like hanging on to the ANC. And at that time for me, I had already realized that the ANC is not as wonderful as you think. But it was difficult to convince people otherwise. And we started having meetings. I remember the first meeting was in the backyard of my house where I used to live. We were sitting on beer crates, and people were trying to understand why is this happening, because there was a campaign before 1994 that we should declare the government of the day ungovernable, let's not pay for the services. Now the ANC is in power, now we are told to pay, and people are receiving exorbitant bills. And when you go and report this to the ANC structures, the only answer you get is you must pay, despite the fact that these bills were accumulated as part of the campaign. So we then, so the group grew and we formed what was called the Diepkloof Consent Residence, because the area was Diepkloof. Only to find that there were other consent residents that were coming up in different parts of Soweto. And that is how the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee was formed, because we came together as the consent residents, and then we formed sort of like a general Soweto oil structure. It became the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, but we were also looking at issues of access to water, privatization of water, and also access to housing. So what was great with being in those structures was the fact that we were not only talking about the problems that people were experiencing in the township, but we were linking the local to global issues. That's how I got connected to issues around IMF and World Bank, even the World Trade Organization. Because when we had these meetings, our meetings were highly informative. Like it was not about, hey, we don't have water, no, but we were linking issues of colonialism, apartheid, neocolonialism.
Sure. I imagine that having those meetings with people who had been part of the apartheid struggle made it in some ways easier, but in some ways more difficult too. Huh?
It was. And some of the ANC members would be like, yeah, but why are you talking party politics? Because they've never had those things, you know. But what I proud myself for was that I was able to talk to the people in those meetings in their languages and dismantle even those big terms, you know, and make a connection with their lives. And I was also then able to train some of the people that I was working with to be able to talk on these issues and make linkages with their practical experiences. And so that struggle grew, and other organizations came up. And while we were forming the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, there was also the Anti-Privatization Forum coming up. And that's how then we were linked to other structures beyond South Africa. And that's how I became also involved in 50 Years is Enough, and also some other NGOs like Halifax Initiative, and then I was then invited to do speaking tours around the US and around Canada, and those speaking tours were very important because somehow people thought South Africa was a safe haven. It was wonderful. There's freedom, there's Mandela. Wherever you go, people will be like, "Are you from Mandela's country?" But as soon as I talk about the real issues, by the time I end my speech, some would hate me and say, "How can you say that about Mandela?" But that was my experience, and
Sure.
that was how I also grew in the struggle.
So when we're talking about community organizing, I think, Virginia, you're still very much a community organizer, but you're organizing on issues that must be much more tough. Even that must have been tough 10 years ago, but it must be even more tough to be organizing around LGBTI issues in today's South Africa.
Yeah, no, these issues are very difficult, and they are even more difficult in South Africa because, there's kind of like a clash, because the law says something, but what people think and what people perceive these issues becomes very difficult.
So the law is progressive, the law is good.
The law is progressive in South Africa, and it's very disturbing because South Africa has like a wonderful legal framework, but at the same time South Africa is the highest in experiencing the killing and the rape of LGBT people.
Yeah, I think here at Peace Vigil we'd like to know a little bit more about what is this term corrective rape, and what does that even mean?
Oh, we don't like that term because then it confirms that there's something that you are supposed to be corrected.
But this is why I don't understand.
Yes,
what is it?
this was the term that was actually, I think it was popularized by media, and media is powerful, but it comes from an act of people trying to convince themselves that if they rape a lesbian can then change to be a straight woman, if there's something like that. And it has been very, very high in South Africa since 2000, I think. And the brutality of the killing, because after they rape you, the reason why they kill you is because you are raped by people that you know. So they know that if they don't kill you, you'll tell on them. So they rape you and they kill you brutally. And the brutality of those killings is very worrying. And it confirms the inherent nature of violence that South Africa is, as a country. And so it is tough work, because there are issues around culture, issues around religion that people feel that they subscribe to, and therefore what religion says it is what it should be.
Can you talk a little bit about that religious influence? Because we've seen that for example, the Catholic Church still, of course, has homophobic tendencies, but it's become a little bit better, I would say.
Yes, it is.
But here in South Africa, we don't. I mean, I think there's a rising evangelical church or something that is very homophobic. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it is still tough, but what's happening now, I never thought of it 5 years ago, and precisely because organizations like the Other Foundation has developed a strategy that seeks to work beyond ourselves, beyond the LGBTI people. And this strategy talks to working with the religious leaders or faith leaders, and it talks to working with parents of the LGBTI people. It talks to working with the trade unions as well as business. And through working with our partners in the 13 countries of Southern Africa, the Other Foundation has managed to bring the issue on the table of many churches, especially the mainstream churches. For instance, there is a discussion in the Lutheran Church now, there's a discussion in the Methodist Church, and the Buchol that you've met is actually a pastor. He is the one leading the religious program in the other foundation, and he meets with the religious leaders. And the approach that the other foundation has taken is working wonders, because when you meet with the religious leaders, we don't say to them they should accept whether homosexuality is right or wrong, but our approach is, as the church leaders, they are highly influential in the society, and they should understand that what they say on the pulpit is highly powerful and highly regarded by the people that listens to it. And as a progressive force in the society that looks into issues of violence, issues of mental health, issues of homelessness, they should understand that what they say against homosexual people actually perpetuates those issues.
It can turn into violence.
It can turn into violence. It results to people being killed, because if someone says LGBTQI people are equals to animals, then people take that and then they use that to justify killing LGBTI people. And we have seen a turn, a very wonderful turn, where now we can sit in meetings with religious leaders. And the work that the other foundation is doing is great. It is also supported by research. There are two very important research pieces that are linked to that work of working with the religious leaders. The first piece is called When Faith Does Violence. The other one is Silence No Longer. So Silence No Longer, we're urging the religious leaders not to be silent in the event where there's a lesbian that is being killed. But also what is wonderful with that approach is that in the meeting of the religious leaders, we also bring parents who are church members. And that has also works wonderfully, because then parents will say, I am a mother of a lesbian woman, I am a member of a church. I become conflicted when you are on the pulpit and saying my child is a demon. How does that work? And it has changed the attitudes of the religious leaders. And that has been like the highlight of the work that we do in this service.
So you're talking about the change of attitudes and behaviors, and that's really tough. And you mentioned that South Africa has a good legal framework. I guess my question is, if we can change the attitudes and behaviors of some of these leaders, do you think we'll see better implementation of the legal framework that exists?
Yes. What also transpired out of the engagement that we have with the church leaders is that the South African Council of Churches adopted a resolution that they denounce the killing of LGBTI people in South Africa. We wanted more, but that is a start. And that has brought in a series of engagements with the church leaders in different parts of South Africa. In Northwest last week, an organization that works in Northwest, Gay Umbrella, met with the Methodist Church. Amadodana, so we say it's a group of men in the Methodist Church. And we had a meeting with the bishops in the region of Southern Africa of the Methodist Church. And so that meeting has resulted in taking a resolution that they are going to begin to have these conversations in their different structures across the region. And so we are hoping that the resolution can expand, and also everything that needs to be changed can also expand beyond the South African borders, or even in the whole world. And I agree, if the church leaders can have a change of heart and also a change of how they do things, that can influence a whole lot of other stakeholders in the society.
We see globally, we see that LGBTQI issues are more talked about, more addressed, I think people are more likely, even people of my father's generation, for example, are more likely to accept their own family members who may be queer than it was a generation ago. Do you see that also happening in South Africa? Because I think it's a global phenomenon that people are coming out more openly, more quickly, more comfortably. Is that the case here too?
It is. Okay, so what happens is that in the past few years, maybe 3 or 5 years, we've seen a number of young people coming out as queer people, right? And I think there's a balance of, yes, positiveness and also negativity. And in 2013, that's why then I sat down with 2 other people and we founded an organization called Parents, Families and Friends of South African Queers, precisely because we felt that if queer people are accepted from home, that will also contribute towards changing the broader society. I mean, we always say charity begins at home, and you also feel that love conquers all. If you love your child, then you are teaching the next person how to love your child. And we then learned through the work that we do with that organization. The past 2 days we were having our strategic planning for 5 years going forward. We learned that parents actually are not homophobic. It's either they're afraid, precisely because being queer is associated with violence, death, hatred, right? And then 2, we learned that actually when you tell your parent that you are lesbian or gay, so you are coming out of the closet, but that's when they go into the closet, because it's if you come out to your mother, and if your father is still alive, they get into the closet, because they're afraid of what the father would say. And in our families, when there's something kind of like abnormal about the child, a mother is always blamed. Yeah, it's this child of yours, right? In my family, we never had a gay person. We never had a lesbian. It might be from your family. So we then learned how to work with the parents, taking those things into consideration, and also linking the fact that the young LGBTI people come out in the midst of a whole lot of other things that young people go through. For instance, adolescence, issues around understanding their sexuality, and that's why we have components in this organization of working with the young LGBTI and working with the parents of the LGBTI in trying to balance the two.
Great. For my last question, I want to sort of bring some of these issues back, because you mentioned your father. He was an insightful, thoughtful man, but he also was a bit tribal in the sense that he and we saw this to some extent with Zuma becoming the president here, with anti-Zuma factions maybe coming up from other places, but also the strength of the Zulu minority. The Zulu are not a majority, but they are the biggest minority in South Africa. So can you talk a little bit about what does it really mean to be a pluralistic society when you can have these kind of divisions? How can we? It's not just apartheid. One feels like South Africa is a bunch of all these groupings that are hostile to each other potentially. Mm-hmm. And then if you throw in sex and sexuality and gender issues on top of that, it becomes even more confusing. Mm-hmm. So how do we begin to really have a conversation about what a pluralistic South Africa looks like today, given that we have these divisions?
I think we were damaged by apartheid, and apartheid made it deliberate to emphasize on these groupings. And for me, I wish there's a day where we see each other as humans rather than Zulus or Tswanas or Xhosas, because it was working for them. If you go to Deep Kloof, where I grew up in Deep Kloof Zone 5, and that is predominantly Zulus living in Deep Kloof Zone 5. If you go to Deep Kloof Zone 1, there are 2 sections. There's Deep Kloof Zone 1 for Zulus and Deep Kloof Zone 1 for Sothos. Why? it was divide and rule, right? If we can then begin to understand that these fragmentations were actually deliberate so that they are able to rule us. But if we say we want freedom, we need to dismantle those, fragmentations and dismantle those thoughts about us being different from, Zulus think that I'm Zulu, but I know that Zulus think that they are the best tribe ever, I mean, and they think that they have more entitlement to South Africa than other tribes, and I think that delays the struggle, because we focus on fighting ourselves without having to pull together and build a strong voice and accept pluralism in a manner that we embrace it, but at the same time not just embracing it, but using it to our own advantage rather than to our own disadvantage.
You've been listening to Baobab, Redwood and Neem. Special thanks to Virginia Magwaza, Advocacy and Campaigns Officer of the Other Foundation, for taking time out to talk to us. The Other Foundation is an African trust that advances equality and freedom in Southern Africa with a particular focus on sexual orientation and gender identity. Peace Vigil would like to thank Lal Bahadur Singh for his artistic contributions. The theme song is by Shireen, with music by Shireen, Jeremy Karodia, and Samir Dosani. The editing is done by Samir Dosani, camera Shireen, and this is a Peace Vigil production.
Continue our work to make the world more peaceful, and peace begins with us to make the world more peaceful and peaceful.